Hello and welcome to the Social Vision Conference. We are just getting some few things set on our end, so we apologize for a slight delay. Sorry about that. I am very excited for this next panel. It's a topic that I think is one of the most interesting that Philip Wexler deals with in the Social Vision book, which is a topic of incarceration and the Rebbe's view on that. So we have a great panel of people who can speak to that today, and it's moderated by a good friend of mine. Before we get started, I just wanted to plug a few things. First is this is actually our last panel for today. So please join us for this and then rejoin us for tomorrow. And I'll mention what specific panels we have at the end of the session. I wanted to plug, and Hattie can say a little bit about this, but just a little bit before we get started, but I will put a link in the chat for anyone on the Zoom for our learning fellowship that Hattie was a fellow in this past summer, and Elaine was a guest speaker in. So without further ado, and I can speak a little bit more to that at the end if that piqued your interest, I will pass it over to my good friend Hattie, who will get us started for today.
Thanks so much, Jonah. Super appreciate it. So excited to be here. As Jonah said, I was a learning fellow this past summer, and we learned a lot and got to build some community around talking through social vision and the ideas of the Rebbe and how they apply to our lives today. And I was put in contact with some great thinkers, including Elaine Leeder, who's with us here today, as well as Julie Wertheimer and Malik Bandy. I'm so excited to introduce our panelists. Welcome everyone here on Zoom and also on Facebook. So for folks joining us, there's the Q&A function to submit any questions that you might have throughout the panel. And these will be answered at the end. So if you have any questions, please submit them. There will also be time for discussion and answering at the end. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me introduce our first speaker, who is Elaine Leeder. Elaine Leeder is a social science dean emerita and professor emerita of sociology at Sonoma State University. She has 44 years of teaching experience, including working in prisons with convicted felons. Leeder was the visiting scholar at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and a recipient of the Real Hero Award by the American Red Cross for her prison work. So Elaine, take it away.
Thanks. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. The bio doesn't talk about my work in prison. So let me just say, I started working in prisons probably about 25 years ago at Elmira Correctional Facility, where I started prison education program. Then I moved to California and worked in the prison university program at San Quentin. From that, I ran groups in San Quentin, self-help, and now I'm doing victim offender dialogues. Certainly Malik is our expert on settings in prison, and I won't even begin to address that. But what I will address is the Rebbe's chapter 4 that we're talking about, and how does that relate to working in prisons, because it really is very relevant. The title of my talk is usually, "What's a nice Jewish girl like you doing in a place like this?" And I've often been asked that because, it's rather unlikely. Notice my maiden name was Schneerson, and I am related distantly to the Rebbe. I was brought up Orthodox. So how did I end up in prison, working with prisoners? Well, my father was a Holocaust refugee, and I really did want to understand why people did stuff that I didn't quite understand. And let me tell you, being and working in prison has been a remarkable eye-opening experience. And what I have really learned is that someone is not the worst thing they've ever done in their lives, and that there is deep and wondrous humanity in prison. And I can honestly say that some of my closest and dearest friends who are people who were lifers, who have committed murder, kidnapping, robberies, and I would trust them with my life. So I've had a remarkable experience. Certainly there are people in prison that I stayed away from and that the guys told me to stay away from. But what I learned, Rebbe says in one of his chapters, that being in prison makes it unlikely that someone can reach one's fullest potential. And I actually would argue with the Rebbe on that one, were he alive, because I have seen some remarkable experiences of transformation and change inside. And maybe people who are inside would have done better, certainly out in the real world, but folks inside are in the belly of the beast. It is the worst of our social conditions in the United States. And within that setting, and let me say, in spite of prison, people are transformed by the experience of their brothers and their being with their brothers and their sisters. And so the Rebbe argues that there's reciprocity between oneself and one's community and the cosmos. And I would agree that there is reciprocity that takes place in prison. And the Rebbe says that an individual can only achieve personal success through giving and receiving, and they're both equally important. And I have to say that I was once a social worker, I've been a college professor. The most meaningful interactions that I have ever had have been inside, particularly when I'm doing victim offender dialogues between someone who has committed a crime and the victims or the victims' families, where I've seen forgiveness, deep, profound remorse, and this sense of connection that takes place between the giver and the person who is receiving. And it's a mutuality that takes place when this kind of experience happens. It brings joy and happiness. I've watched my students and group members work with each other. I've watched them holding each other in mutual respect. And even in the most inhospitable settings, I've seen remarkable bonding that takes place between prisoners and volunteers. I've not seen the deep and profound connections with correction officers and incarcerated people, but for the rest of the communities that go in, and for volunteers and workers, educators, along with prison inmates, they've been remarkably charitable to one another. And the Rebbe talks about the ability to give as being both an asset and a vulnerability. The asset is in the giving, and I've seen that with many prisoners who share with their brothers. I've only worked in men's prisons, so I will speak of that. And the reciprocity that takes place, say, in classes, students helping each other out, tutoring each other, being there, saying, you're going to do it, brother, you're going to make it, we're going to help you get through it. And they do. I mean, I taught classes where I saw students really struggle, but because of the support that came from their brothers inside, that reciprocity took place. The other thing that the Rebbe says is that the needy recipient has power and dignity. And I will say, both for myself and for those who received from those who give, it's a deep emotional connection that takes place when one is sharing either knowledge or self-help information or doing a dialogue. What happens is the recipient grows, but the giver grows even more because of that openness and connection, heart connection, deep heart connection that can happen in the worst possible settings. I was recently at Pelican Bay visiting with an inmate who was given life without parole plus 11 years. He'll never get out. And what I'm doing with him is trying to get him an innocence project, getting a reporter to take his case. And as I left, we put our hands up against the glass, which was separating us, and we each wept in a way that I have not wept with my very own friends, because he saw what I was doing and was grateful, and I felt good helping a man who I truly respect and believe is there. He should not be there. He was framed. So you can both give and you can take in a prison setting, but I will always add that it's not the best setting for that kind of an experience. In fact, it's remarkable to me that people make those kinds of connections in the belly of the beast. The ugliest places in the world are in prisons. But we complete each other by being human with each other, with a spiritual giving, with an intellectual giving, with an emotional giving. And the Rebbe also says, and I really do believe this, that everyone is rich and valuable in their own sense. And that's been my experience working inside. Everyone is valuable. And there's a sense of profound healing and connection that can take place, even though we're in that awful setting. And I'm going to end very quickly just talking about, Martin Buber talked about the I-thou connection, the self connecting with the soul of another. And that means we're embracing the universe with that kind of a connection. And I would say that my experiences in prison are I-thou connections, as I have seen prisoners connecting with each other in an I-thou relationship. And so even though you might not believe that this is possible, it is possible inside for that humane and deep, meaningful, and profound transformation. And with that, I'd like to turn it over so we give Malik a chance to talk about what it's really like. And I guess Julie goes next.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was great. I'm excited to discuss with the rest of the panelists. Yes, I'd like to introduce Julie Wertheimer. So Julie is the project director for Pew Charitable Fund's Public Safety Performance Project, where she oversees the criminal and juvenile justice research and policy portfolios, including technical assistance to states and counties, policy analysis and development, and public and policy education on justice issues. Before joining Pew, Wertheimer was the senior director of the Office of Criminal Justice for the City of Philadelphia, where she also served as chief of staff to the deputy managing director for criminal justice and chief of staff for public safety, as well as assistant budget director. Excited to have you, Julie. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me today. And I just have to give the disclaimer at the beginning, all of these are my personal opinions and do not reflect my current or former employers. And I'm doing this on my own time in my own personal capacity. And just to give you a little background, not too dissimilar from Elaine, I was drawn to this work, well, initially into public service in general, rooted in the values of Tikkun Olam, but also specifically to the work in criminal justice and public safety, being the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors and having a healthy distrust of authority, and yet choosing to work from within the system to make adjustments, make reforms, right some wrongs, and knowing, especially when we're talking about things like police and law enforcement and court systems, that they don't always operate in the best interest and can be unfairly biased and punitive against certain groups of people. Certainly, family experience in the Holocaust, and certainly those experiences exist today when we're talking about the American criminal legal system, and especially in Black and Brown communities, which is why I asked my friend and former colleague Malik to join us today, because Elaine and I can speak about this and speak about our own experiences, but I am a white woman who has never been incarcerated, never even been arrested, and so my experience is very different and not as authentic as the communities that are really directly impacted here. And so I will not speak that long because my voice is not as important in this conversation, but I do want to touch on a few different things. And, I won't repeat what Elaine said, although I am in agreement with her on many of her points. I think some other points I want to raise is, when we talk about prison and incarceration, often ironically, when you're talking at the state level or even the federal level, we talk about prisons as institutions of corrections and the idea that they're supposed to be rehabilitative. And that might have been like the theoretical intention, and certainly the value that I think many of us would want to embody and see happen, but often these places are not set up to be rehabilitative in the least. And it is despite that folks are able to realize their potential anyway. And instead, we have incredibly punitive systems that are just intended to keep people removed from society, do not facilitate justice, because there's no reconciliation, there's no chance for improvement. And that really goes against the fundamental values that I think the Rebbe talks about and other, are often embodied in Jewish values. And so I think that's important to highlight that, the death penalty, life without parole, all of these sentencing tools that are often frequently used every day across this country, especially less so in other places, go against the very idea of justice, because it's not achieved when you don't have reconciliation, when justice isn't rooted in the community and bringing the community together and having them heal, but rather punitive against one individual, and often unfairly so. And often, as we see with the number of wrongful convictions that have been overturned in recent years, have totally been, just targeted against certain communities without any proof thereof. So I just wanted to put that out on the table, but I want to turn to Malik, who I know Hattie will introduce in a second, and let him speak about his experiences and what these systems are really like. And, for those interested, the opportunities to advocate for change, both in minimizing the number of people who become incarcerated in the first place because of the punitive effects even 48 hours of incarceration can have, but also for those who are incarcerated for any period of time, the kind of environment that really should exist in order to be supportive and rehabilitative and find justice and healing rather than just punishment.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was excellent. I'm, again, really excited to tease these ideas out with you all through discussion. And now I'd like to introduce Malik Bandy. Malik is committed to tackling the injustices of the criminal justice system and creating transformative change through collective effort. As the Community Engagement and Communications Coordinator for the Safety and Justice Challenge, Malik works to ensure community voices have a seat at the table. He believes that individuals who are impacted by the system hold invaluable insights that are critical for moving the reform effort forward. Through his role, he is dedicated to bridging the gap between city government and the communities it serves in order to build stronger, more trusting, and productive relationships. Malik is a passionate advocate for social and criminal justice reform in every area of his life. As a mentor, he helps young men make positive life decisions and become leaders in their communities. He lectures and works with colleges, universities, and local schools throughout the area to educate and inspire others. Malik holds a degree from Villanova University and certifications in various trade roles. Malik, so excited to have you. I believe you're on mute. Yes.
Hello, everyone. How y'all doing? So I come to this work through pain and suffering. I come through this work through pain and suffering. At the age of 18, I was sentenced to a state correctional institution in upstate Pennsylvania. I served 20 years of incarceration from 18 to 38 years old. I've just celebrated, sidebar, just celebrated my 5th year home, October 6th, which is great. A number of thoughts is running through my head though right now. And one that always jumps out at me is something that Elaine said as it relates to men and women being incarcerated and their level of compassion, right? I'm reminded of a quote by Fyodor Dostoevsky. He said that a degree of civilization within a society can be measured by the entering of its prisons. I'll say that again. A degree of civilization within a society can be measured by the entering of its prisons. And what he meant by that was that what you see in prison, whether it's the negative, the bad, the however you determine the good, the worst, is a microcosm of our larger society, right? So people in prison aren't anomalies. They're not abnormals. They're not individuals who warrant nor deserve the label of other, right? So the love, the compassion, the trust, the humility, the humanity, the anger, the frustration, the rage, the hate, all of those things that exist in our normal society exist in prisons, right? Prisons are places that are, and I'll be perfectly honest, prisons do us no service, right? If anything, they take away from our humanity. If anything, they represent the worst of what our society should be, not what our prisons should be, but what our society should be, right? They're very archaic, antiquated, draconian places. They're, you know, and who I am as a man today, I am, and I've heard this term a few times in both Julie and Elaine's opening statements. I am who I am today, despite my circumstances and conditions and living in prison, right? But I would be remiss if I didn't say that I am a product of prison. I am a product of good men, i.e. those lifers that Elaine talked about earlier, right? Oftentimes, I learned from them more than I learned from anybody else. I was mentored by men who had 25, 30, 35, 40 years in institutions. I acquired my education. I was blessed to acquire a degree from Villanova while being incarcerated. And I can tell you that the level of humanity that I experienced in my fellow incarcerated person was much higher than I would than I experienced from correctional officers, much higher than I experienced from anyone working in the criminal justice system, right? Prisons are very dehumanizing. I won't sit here and sugarcoat it and say that, you know, prisons are nice places. Do you have moments where you are able to grow and develop and yes, but just like in our normal society, you have those moments as well, right? And do you have moments where you're angry or frustrated or bitter, or, you know, you're sad, depressed, anxious, all things that exist both here and in prisons. What tends to happen is people tend to see prison as this othering thing over here and then judge it and make as if it's an anomaly or it's something that was created outside of the vacuum, right? When, you know, there's a deeper connection. We're all interconnected to one another, right? I would honestly tell you that I personally wouldn't change my experiences for nothing in the world, right? Because I like who I've become, right? The good and the bad of my experiences. Somebody asked me a couple of weeks ago, did I have any regrets? And I mean, as a human being, of course, we all have regrets. But when I really think about, you know, the regrets that I have, it wasn't my prison experience, because my prison experience did something for me that I wouldn't want to change for nothing in the world. It gave me a mission and it gave me a purpose. The work that I do today, the work that I will do tomorrow, and the work that I will probably do the rest of my life will be in service of someone else, will be in me trying to encourage, motivate, and build someone else up. I had a friend a long time ago say to me, he said, focus on providing a service and the service will be provided for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malik. That was excellent. I was furiously taking notes the whole time you were talking. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to turn it over to discussion, if that's okay with the fellow panelists. Maybe there are some things that came up. There are some things that came up for me during this, but maybe I'll let the other panelists respond first in reaction to, now that we've all heard each other speak. Is there someone who wants to respond to what we're talking about?
I think there's a question in the Q&A.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I can read the question in the Q&A. Okay, so this is from one of our panelists. And I will read it now. So my father was abused as a child and became an abuser. As a child, I watched cops and social workers and teachers go by. No one ever protected us from my dad. He abused 4 children 4 years apart. How do you balance justice and protection for victims with criminal reform?
Well, I'd like to at least begin to address it, and then maybe others will.
Okay.
Certainly, it has to be done a lot earlier. Your father was a victim, and victims, what is it? Hurt people hurt people. That's the phrase I learned inside. And so there's justice, of course, that has to be done because he did abuse children, and that has to have some intervention. But I was once a psychotherapist, and what I learned was that you really had to work with the first wound, and you can stop the abuse if you really start working with the person who was abused and the person who did the abusing to begin with. And so I would say, I don't always believe in therapy. It could be spiritual. It could be a program, a 12-step program. But that abuser has to have had some intervention so that it doesn't repeat itself, so that one of those 4 children don't go on to do it as well, because it's a life cycle that just keeps perpetuating itself. Yes, there has to be justice. And, you know, people who are abusers have to wear the monitors. They end up doing time where, let me tell you, there is very little treatment at all for somebody who is an abuser. They're considered pretty low on the totem pole in prison and are ripe for abuse as well. And so my answer is you have to go back to the source of the pain, which would be having that abuser get help in some form, not always therapy. Although I have run groups for sexual abusers, and let me tell you, sexual abusers know how to call out other sexual abusers and call them on their games and how they're playing the system and oneself. So that's my answer to it. There needs to be justice, but there needs to be help for the person who was victimized originally.
Well, so I'm thinking about the last part of your question. And first, let me say I'm sorry that happened to you and your siblings. The question becomes, as it relates to prison or it relates to justice, is what do you want the person to become once you send them away? Right? What do you want the person to become once you send them away? If we're looking to just warehouse people, then we do what we're currently doing. But if we're looking to bring about a sense of change, transformation in the individual, then the way that we do prisons in America has to change, right? The notion of justice, there's no justice as it relates to either the victim or the offender, because that's not what the system is designed to do. What we need to figure out is how do we make whole the individual who has wronged the victim? Because I think of it this way, majority of the people who enter prison will be released. I think it's like something like 89, 90% of the people who enter prison will be released. The question is, how do you want them to come back? Do you want them to come back as bitter, angry, vengeful people? Or do you want them to come back as a part of the whole again, which is our society? And it's a dual thing, because one, the way that we perceive people in prison has to change just as much as the work that we do inside of prisons have to change, right? Most of the groups that I encountered as it relates to my own personal growth and development was prisoner-led, right? Was incarcerated person-led. It wasn't staff-led. Some of my most profound insights about myself came from other people who were incarcerated with me, and not from a psychologist or a psychiatrist. The programs were so effective. At one point, they said, "Oh, it's a security risk." So no, they called it no inmate on inmate teaching, right? When I first went to prison, I went to prison when I was 18. Most of your programs were ran by incarcerated men, whether that was thinking for a change, violence prevention, anger management. Most of your tutors, most of your GED tutors were incarcerated people, right? Most of your spiritual and was ran by incarcerated people, right? And then the system somehow shifted its perspective again and said, "Oh, well, no," they called it inmate on inmate. And I hate using those type of terms because language is very important. So I also advocate that we remember our language, because language can other. So I try to use terms like incarcerated person, because everything is stripped from you once you're incarcerated. You become a number. My number, I'll never forget my number, DF 5241. It'll be etched in my head to the day I die, right? And trying to make meaning out of your name, inmate, parolee, convict, these terms put you in a certain kind of thinking. But if we're really talking about changing our system, then we have to use terms like incarcerated person, right? Formerly incarcerated person, or Malik Bandy, for that matter, right? I refuse to allow people to put me in a box when I was incarcerated, because that's not how I carried myself. I carried myself like a young man, and I expected to be treated like a young man. So I didn't go by labels I didn't allow people to box me. And even as a free man, I don't allow people to box me in. I don't use titles like formerly incarcerated or parolee. I don't use those terms. I try to use people's names, because once we do that, we start to think different. Our behavior starts to change, and our vision starts to change about how we see these individuals. But ending, if we are to address any issues in our criminal justice system, we have to ask that question: how do we want them to return?
Thank you so much, Malik. There's something in what you were saying that I wanted to pull out, which was this idea of with what you just ended with, that the whole, if we make our beings whole, we also make society whole, and how those things are exactly the same thing. Like a whole being is also one that belongs in a whole society, or creates a whole society. And those are big themes that I see in the Revi's work, and I'm really glad that you brought that. I felt it like really concretely in what you were saying, that if we heal the individual and make the individual whole, then we're also making society whole, and really highlighting that interconnectedness. Thank you so much. There's another question in the chat, which is, Mariama Kampa talks about the difference between reformational consequences and punitive punishments. Can you speak to this distinction? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I'm happy to jump in to start. I think that question gets at the heart of a lot of what we've been discussing this morning. I think there are two different, that kind of puts great titles on the two different paths that our societies can take in trying to dispense what we think of as justice. The punitive punishments are just locking someone away indefinitely, which is what happens in the majority of the criminal legal system and our carceral systems now. And that is punishment for the sake of punishment. No one can speak to the value or the increase in community safety of taking a 17-year-old who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and be friends with someone who might have done something else and sentencing them effectively to life, which is what happened in our country for years and years prior to Supreme Court decisions reversing, giving juveniles life without parole sentences, and yet many of them still face incarceration today, but many of them are home as well. But there was no value in that to the point where we had a Supreme Court decision that undid many of those thousands of sentences. When you're talking about reformational consequences, when someone does something wrong, you have to look at it as treating the issue. It goes back to what Elaine was saying in the prior question. Like, there is something for most people that is an underlying cause that created that behavior that we treat as criminal, and that has to be addressed for the sake of the person and the sake of society. But often we do that by locking people away rather than addressing the issue, rather than counseling or support or housing. You know, if you want to talk about people who are struggling from substance use that we criminalize way too often in this country, who might steal something from a store. You know, we treat that as a crime. That is considered a crime in this country. And yet, oftentimes they are locked up for it, where they really are trying to meet their own basic needs. And we should be figuring out how to help them get those basic needs met, get treatment when they're ready for it, because you can't necessarily force treatment on people, and support them in any way we can, offer them housing. You know, you can't have a job and address issues if you don't know where you're going to sleep at night. And so it really goes back to the fundamental questions of, sure, there can be consequences and people need to take appropriate action to own those consequences, but we also need to make sure that they have the resources they need to be able to address those consequences instead of just locking them up. And those are the two different ways in my mind how we approach this.
I would like to just take it one step further, because I really liked what Julie had to say. And I really believe in abolitionism. I know that sounds a little extreme to some ears, but prisons are not the answers. I think that there are ways that we can change ourselves and change society without, yes, of course, there are serial killers or, you know, sociopaths who we don't want out on the streets, but they are truly, truly, truly the minority of the prisoners that we have in this country. And that we really need to be talking about alternatives to incarceration and abolishing prisons. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, but I certainly do hold that out as a higher value. In the interim, I really do believe in restorative justice as well, so that if, you know, if somebody steals food because they're hungry, they don't need to go to prison. Maybe they need to get a job in that grocery store. And I really adore the Native American approach, in which there are healing circles. People sit together and talk about what are some of the solutions to this person having done this to their society. And so I just wanted to introduce two concepts that I think are relevant. I don't want to reform the prison industrial complex. I want to abolish it. And although it is not going to happen in my life, I want to have steps, see that as the ultimate goal, and also use restorative justice as a means to solve some of these problems.
So I'll say this. I'm all for accountability. I'm all for responsibility. As a matter of fact, I'll be the first person to tell you I take full responsibility for my actions. My actions, not the choices that created those actions, though. Right? One of my favorite quotes is from a professor at Temple University. She said to me once, she said, criminal activity is symptomatic of a much deeper illness. It is a societal dysfunction by which we all play a part, either by omission or commission. The things we do and the things we don't do in our society. See, when we look at the criminal justice system is the end result of other systems, right? It's the dump off, it's the trash part. It's the dump off of other systems, right? So either by omission or commission, the things we do and the things we don't do. Every one of our systems in our society today is economic based. If you don't have enough money, you don't get good health care. If you don't have enough money, you don't get good housing. If you don't have enough money, you don't go to a good school. If you live in an environment where I live in Philadelphia, right? On every two and a half blocks, I can see a bar or a deli, right? I live in a low socioeconomic community where kids are growing up and they don't have the proper resources, as Julie talked about earlier, right? Whose responsibility is this? It's easy to say, oh, it's their fault. It's the government's fault. It's the system, as if the system is a person not made up by people. So the question becomes, what role do you play as an individual? Either by omission or commission, the things we do and the things we don't do in our society contribute to all of our systems because they're interconnected. They're not individual systems that exist unto themselves. They're made up by people who are in many ways a number of things, whether they care, they don't care, they're selfish, they have apathy, they have empathy. All of these things make up our system. So we have to ask ourselves as individuals, what role do I play in creating a better future? What steps should I be taking? And I had a friend of mine tell me, another friend who was incarcerated. He said, don't look at the world like this. He said, look at the world like this and work where you're from. Work exactly from where you're at. And I promise you, you'll make change. Change isn't this big thing. Change is this. It's incremental. It's every day. So if we're really focused on changing our system, if we're really concerned about making a difference, then as individuals, we have to make individual changes ourselves to bring it to the collective. Because synergy is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm like, this is all sifting in my brain, and I'm just thinking about like having moments like these where we hear each other's stories and our perspectives. Those are the motivating moments that ask us to do the work, to look where we're standing right now and do that change. I'm an educator, and I think a lot about like what motivates people to like question where they're standing and to bring in that change. And I'm reminded in this moment that it's hearing each other's stories. So thank you so much, and perspectives. I have a question. If we, let me just read what's in the chat, which from one of our participants, which says, or if you're the wrong color, you can be redlined out of good schools like I was in Tennessee. So yeah, I'm talking about those systems. Malik, did you want to respond to that, or?
He's absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Redlining is something that goes all the way back to the 50s, or earlier than that, actually, to the 30s. But yes.
Excellent. So I had, because this is a conference on envisioning the future, I wanted to talk a little bit about envisioning the future. And I'm thinking a lot about this question of removal. And so it's something that the Rebbe actually advocates for in some ways, in which someone who is not whole and has been harmed and is then harming, as we've seen, there's great benefit in removing this person from society, but that this person must be removed with their whole community. So if they're a teacher, they need to be removed with their school. If they're a baseball player, their coach has to be brought with them to removal. And I'm just thinking about the question of removal from society in the process of healing, and wanted to hear other panelists' thoughts on this, and thinking specifically as substance abuse and rehab as a model for removal, and how, if we see some, in a lot of ways, the difference between rehab and prison is that in one, we see someone as whole, or as like someone who has been who has a disease and needs help, and one who's like their core is rotten and they need, to be removed. And so how can we take this? What is the value of removal as we think about, what does the future without prisons look like? And I wanted to pass that along to see if anyone had any responses to this.
So I want to challenge the notion of kind of not necessarily a difference between rehab and prison, but the notion of that we send different people there, because we often do incarcerate a ton of people for things like substance use or behavioral health issues, which are in fact medical issues and not crimes. But if you are poor, if you are Black, if you are not, a well-resourced person, you often do end up in prison, jail, or other programs run by these carceral institutions, and not the fancy rehab centers we often see celebrities go to when they have issues to deal with. And I think those settings are all sorts of involuntary punitive removal that doesn't help. We've talked about the challenges of incarceration and why removal, especially long-term, is actually not rehabilitative. I think short-term, even when you're talking about people with substance use disorder, want to introduce, or for some folks maybe, the concept of harm reduction. When you're dealing with someone who's struggling with substance use disorder or behavioral health, you can't force treatment on them. It doesn't work. They have to be ready for it. They have to be supported. They have to have other needs met. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster, and then you're going to turn around and criminalize them for not complying with the treatment. And so I think that it just goes back to the fundamental idea of, do we lock people up in one way, shape, or another and rely on removal and punish them, or do we try to meet their needs to heal the issue? And in turn, I think, in an ideal world, heal society. I think there's arguments for temporary removal from the situation, especially when there's individual trauma between the perpetrator and victim. But ultimately, looking forward, you address the issue, you heal the person, you heal the issue in society, in a setting, and not by sending someone away where they're not seen, they're not helped, and they're not heard from again.
I would like to talk about other countries and models that are possible, because I think Julie raises important questions here, or points. Finland and even Israel have models that are a wee bit more progressive than ours. I would never say perfect, but they're not long sentences. for one thing, because long sentences are just removal. There's no sense of transformation taking place or hope for transformation. Finland, I mean, they have prisons, but they're like dorm rooms in college with programming and job programs and healing discussions. And I think that our models here are just archaic and barbaric. And we allege to be a progressive country. And yet, just as Malik says, if you look at how we treat people in prisons, that's what our society, that's the belly of the beast, and we are the beast. And so I really do believe in, looking at other places that have been more successful than us. The problem is public opinion. I mean, we really do have this an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth mentality. And so we don't have a sense that people are really rehabilitatable. We have a sense that we must punish them. When I do my victim offender dialogues, I hear from everybody who participated in the trial that there was never a chance for the person who committed the harm to turn around and speak to the victims or the victim's family. They were told to shut up because you don't want to make your case worse. I mean, if anything, what I see is when people talk as human beings to each other and with each other, there is change. And so we need to look at other models from other parts of the globe, even from organizations and cultures here, Native Americans, for example, who use different models. So I'd say look outside ourselves.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think what I'm sitting with right now is that what we've come to in this discussion is that incarceration is a product of these broken systems, and Malik, you named some, and Elaine, you just added to this idea of public opinion, which I think I want to challenge a little bit in saying that like some people in society are seen as like healable and others aren't, and that might be like the product of another system. And so the reason that this is important in this conversation is important as like the byproduct of so many other systems is like, this is the land that the place that we're coming from. Like, I like this image of like, this is what we have been drawn to, and this is what we care about. And this is the moment in which we're creating change from. Excellent. All right. So we have about 4 minutes left. I wanted to offer if anyone else had a question, or if there were any things that folks on the panel wanted to bring attention to or highlight in our last little bit of time.
Well, I think, leave it to me. I'll talk when in doubt. I know, let me just talk from personal experience. I've been a college professor for 44 years, and I've taken countless numbers of students to prison to meet with folks, to hear what it's like, to learn. I've had ex-prisoners come to my classes, and every time I do it, some students tell me it was the most remarkable experiences of their life, because they had these stereotypes about people in prison, and then they discovered the humanity and the redemptive qualities of humanity. And I'm a very practical person. I would just say, get to know people in one's community who have been incarcerated, and one will learn beyond anything you could have imagined. Because unfortunately, many of us look at TV shows like Lock Up or any of those crime shows, and the stereotypes are profound and they just proliferate. And we're fighting an uphill battle here in our society against the imagery of incarcerated people and prisons. And we have to debunk those stereotypes and work personally on any number of issues that grab you about it. It's like a Buddhist image of water on a stone. This is not going away in the near future. We have to keep pouring water on this stone of prisons, incarceration, and the whole system, carceral system. So work on it yourself, please.
Thank you, Elaine. Yes, I keep coming back to this word envisioning, and also like said this about the power of language. And if we put forth in our minds like what we if we're paying attention to that, like what you're saying, with awareness, we can create a lot of change that way. Yeah, go for it.
I would say, we're not an introspective society. We must learn how to look at ourselves as guides to how we treat each other, right? We must start to question, I had a professor tell me once, he said, always question the question. And what he meant was, when you look at a situation, if you can't take it apart and put it back together for yourself, then you shouldn't take it as a principle or foundational piece of who you are, right? And I try to live my life that way. As human beings, we all judge, right? We all critique, criticize, find fault. These are normal things in all of us as human beings. But for some of us, the key is not to act out what we judge, what we criticize, what we critique, right? Some things should be left in our brains. And I'm very mindful of that, right? If we're to change our society and envision a better society, we have to change ourselves, right? Because you can be nothing to anyone if you're not something to yourself, right? So it starts with you, and as I said earlier, change is not this massive machine with a billion pieces. It's one piece. You are that one piece that have the ability to create change from where you're at, right? Whether that's introducing yourself to someone that you've never met, whether that's changing a part of your behavior, whether that's changing a part of your language.
Oh no, you muted yourself. Just at the end.
We're in this position because of the way that we treat each other as human beings. If we're to be successful and envision a better future, a better system of governance, a better system of removal, then we have to create better relationships with one another. And those are basic things that each of us have control over. How we treat the next person, how we respond to various stimuli. Those are simple changes in our lives. That's how we create a better future. We don't create a better future by creating more systems or more complicated and complex ways to figure out how to lock people up. We create better systems by creating better relationships with one another.
Thank you so much. Those are beautiful words with which we will end. It was really incredible. Thank you so much, Elaine, Julie, Malik. Really grateful to have shared this last hour with you and all of our participants. I'm going to send it back to Jonah. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hattie. I'll just start by saying, wow, that was such an absolute pleasure to be a witness to that conversation. And yeah, I hope to stay in conversation, or at least to watch you guys stay in conversation going forwards, because I think there's a lot of great things said, and the connections to the Wexler book and just to things that I hold in my own thinking and feeling was really beautiful. So I want to really profoundly thank all three of you, and also Hattie for joining us and bringing in her perspective as well. Today, our Social Vision Conference is coming to a close with this for just today with this panel. So please join us again for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have panels at 10 on interdependence in diverse contexts. And then right afterwards at 11, we have a panel, reflective learning for interconnectivity which is moderated by Ben Selznick from James Madison University. And that's going to be really great. And then at 3, we have our keynote speaker, Elliot Wolfson, a very prominent scholar of Hasidism and Kabbalah, who's going to come in and speak about gender and Hasidism. So those are all going to be really great conversations. Please come join us for those. And yeah, that's how we'll end today. So thank you so much to the panelists again. And we hope to stay in conversation with everyone and see everyone tomorrow. Thanks so much.